The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds.
He will appoint Chief Justice.
North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings and good morning. We had a little technical hassle there that we had to fix. We, as I have talked about in the past, we're in a brave new world here, and what has happened from time to time is the job I'm trying to learn is how all this engineering, this technical wonderfulness unfolds in the way it's supposed to. I don't know these things, but I have a guy who runs Broadcast Tool and Die, and his name is David Clan. And David Clan is a guy who I've engaged to help me out with some of this stuff. And the guy's a genius. Okay, he's just a genius. And we were fixing some things to make it a bit more professional, something that we can depend on a little bit more. And man, it's been kind of a joy, but it does every now and then create some difficulties for us as we move through this new world of getting all this stuff working. So please forgive the delay as we start a little bit later than we normally do on the Wells Report for the 23rd day of May, year of our Lord 2023. So a male driver in Lafayette Square crashed a U-Haul truck into security barriers near the White House. He is now facing charges including, quote, threatened to kill, kidnap, inflict harm on a president, VP family member, according to the United States Park Police. Authorities say that early this morning, in the wee hours, the driver was arrested in Lafayette Square, and he is facing also charges of assault with a dangerous weapon, reckless operation of a motor vehicle, destruction of federal property, and trespassing. The driver's name is Sai Varshith Kandula. He's 19 years of age. He is from Chesterfield, Missouri. Quote, shortly before 10 p.m. Monday, that was yesterday, so it wasn't, he was arrested in the wee hours, but the event actually happened at 10 p.m. last night. Secret Service uniformed division officers detained the officer of a box truck after the vehicle collided with security barriers on the north side of Lafayette Square at 16th Street. This according to Secret Service spokesperson Anthony Guglielmi in a statement. There were no injuries to Secret Service or White House personnel. The cause and manner of the crash are still under investigation. Secret Service and Metro Police swiftly responded to the scene, as you might expect. Video shared by the local Fox News, Fox television station showed investigators using a robot to examine the contents of the truck. What was in the truck? Apparently a Nazi flag. And that was all. Okay, so we don't know exactly what's going on here. This is still something under investigation. Other footage broadcast by WUSA Channel 9 showed a police officer folding up what appeared to be a Nazi flag that was laid down on the sidewalk next to the U-Haul. The station reported it was removed from the vehicle. DC Fire and EMS also were dispatched to the scene. Roads and pedestrian walkways near the crash site were closed as they conducted a suspicious package investigation. Guglielmi said in a tweet about 12:20 a.m. the truck was deemed safe by police and that a preliminary investigation revealed the driver may have intentionally crashed into the security barriers at Lafayette Square. He said charges will be filed by United States Park Police with investigative support from the Secret Service. President Biden was in Washington, D.C. on Monday, meeting at the White House with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy over how to raise the debt ceiling. Quote, I just concluded a productive meeting with Speaker McCarthy about the need to prevent default and avoid a catastrophe for our economy. We reiterated once again that default is off the table. The only way to move forward is in good faith toward a bipartisan agreement, said Biden. While there are areas of disagreement, the Speaker and I, his lead negotiators, Chairman McHenry and Congressman Graves, and our staffs will continue to discuss the path forward. So this interesting symbolism is something that cannot be escaped, and I will tell you why. NBC News reported yesterday that apparently 60,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate, it's a chemical used as a fertilizer and an explosive, is missing after likely disappearing during a rail trip from Wyoming to California last month. This, according to federal records. A rail car carrying ammonium nitrate left a plant operated by explosives manufacturer Dyno Nobel in Cheyenne, Wyoming on April 12th, according to an incident report filed May 10th by a representative of the company with the National Response Center. The report states the chemical was released due to an unknown cause and was discovered missing after the rail car arrived in Saltdale, California, an unincorporated community of more than 1,000 miles from Cheyenne. At the time of the report, the car was empty and on its way back to Wyoming. Ammonium nitrate has been a key ingredient in both terror attacks and fatal incidents. At least 581 people were killed in 1947 when more than 2,000 tons of the stuff at a chemical plant exploded. Not at a chemical plant, but in a cargo ship that was docked at a port in Texas City, Texas. The same year, in Brest, France, a Norwegian ship containing 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate exploded, leading to 29 deaths. It was also used in a 1970 bombing on the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus that led to 1 death and several injuries, and the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, which tragically killed 168 people. In 2013, ammonium nitrate was the cause of an explosion at a fertilizer plant in West Texas, right down the road, killing 15 people, injuring 200, and wiping out hundreds of homes. Federal officials later found the blast was a criminal act. In 2020, it was the source of a colossal explosion in Beirut, Lebanon, when more than 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate detonated, killing more than 200 people and injuring thousands. Quote, "It's a very common chemical that anybody that has used fertilizer has dealt with routinely and doesn't think anything about it," said Nathan Lewis, a chemistry professor at the California Institute of Technology. Huh. Yeah. Just give it a little fuel, usually diesel fuel, in fact, and you're asking for trouble. That's apparently what happened. But a California law enforcement source familiar with the case told NBC News the recent disappearance of the chemical does not appear to be connected to any domestic terrorism threat. The agencies that would examine a potential threat to Homeland Security are not among the main investigative agencies involved in the case. So, what do you think about this? Ammonium nitrate goes missing. A U-Haul truck, conveniently with a Nazi flag in it, crashes into White House barriers on Lafayette Square. So what do you think? Is this more of this famous White House supremacism that, white supremacism that we've been talking about or been hearing about moreover than talking about? Or, and I have to ask this question, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but recent history regarding, shall we say, convenient crime being used as a lever for legislation or other political moves is something that cannot be ignored. So what do you think? Do you think this is a setup? Do you think this is something else? Or do you think this is an honest, say, for example, mistake? I find it interesting. First of all, I find it very, very interesting that these Nazi flags keep showing up. And I find it very interesting that the typical narrative that was started by President Biden regarding the number one domestic terror threat in the United States is white supremacy. This on the heels of the summer of 2020, when there were hundreds of riots, hundreds of deaths, and all manner of destruction, looting, etc., because of BLM riots that were in some cases allowed to continue by the political powers that be for reasons of, well, they're just protesting. The unbelievably absurd imagery of a burning Wendy's behind a reporter saying this is a mostly peaceful protest just rings absolutely truthfully in my ears and eyes as I look at this going, okay. There's also other news involved in that I want to bring up. And I want to bring this up. And once again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there's a circumstance here that has to do with the use of a foreign database against both BLM and January 6th protests. This, according to Forbes. The FBI misused a digital foreign surveillance tool nearly 300,000 times on U.S. citizens, including January 6th insurrectionists and protesters at the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests. This, according to a heavily redacted report obtained by multiple news outlets last Friday, as the FBI continues to come under amazing pressure, all of it appropriate, over its policies. The report from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court found a series of abuses of the FBI's querying procedures between 2020 and 2021 that were widespread and persistent and could require potential changes to a number of FBI personnel with access to that database intended to gather foreign intelligence, called Section 702. According to the report, the FBI failed to present a foreign intelligence purpose to use the database, instead used it to collect information on U.S. citizens, potentially shooting itself in the foot, as the Biden administration hoped to renew the federal act that created Section 702, which is set to lapse at the end of the year. Why am I telling you this? Well, let's take a look at more of this report. Among the findings in the report is a list of 133 identifiers of people used in searches, quote, connected with civil unrest and protests during the 3-week period in June 2020, the same time as the Black Lives Matter protests against the racial injustice following the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. The FBI searched, and this is the significant part, the FBI also searched more than 23,000 queries on people believed to be involved in the January 6th Capitol riot, as well as a batch of queries into more than 19,000 donors to a congressional campaign. Now, this is not what could be argued as a partisan investigation. This is from the FISA court. And the numbers are inescapable. 133 queries of people involved with BLM, 23,000 queries with people involved in January 6th, all of them deemed illegal by the FISA court in a report published in Forbes. Now, and on the chat room, Anoy Guzman says, I see an obvious pattern. I do too. It goes back to Fast and Furious, doesn't it? It goes back to this gun running scheme concocted by the Obama White House as a part of Fast and Furious, which, by the way, was a White House investigation during the Bush administration that was attempting to try to trace the flow of weapons from the United States into Mexico. The Obama administration, as it was subsequently found, used the Fast and Furious investigation as a way to commit gun running through straw purchases on the southern border states from gun shops who called the FBI and said, "Hey, we've got a straw purchase here." They were told to let the sales go by. This involved the death of a United States Border Patrol agent with one of those weapons. And it came out that the reason that that was allowed to happen was because the Obama White House was looking for a lever to pursue legislative action. It was reported and then disappeared because obviously it was something that needed to be reported so that everybody could check the boxes, and then disappeared as a matter of political policy. Really? So now we come back to this sudden attack with a U-Haul truck. I believe the Oklahoma City bombers, I believe the Oklahoma City bombers, or the bomber, well, there were two of them, used a Ryder truck. But the symbolism is, like I said a moment ago, inescapable. So, do you believe this entire white supremacy issue in the United States is a political concoction? Or do you believe there's a genuine white supremacy problem in the United States? My telephone number is 817 379 2172. 817 379 2172. Randy points out that, oh, by the way, with all the trouble the FBI was involved with the FISA court, which was genuine prosecutorial misconduct, nobody has ever been held accountable. That is true. That is news. So let me ask you a question. Is this a setup? Are the American people being used as essentially an unwilling audience in a political drama to be used as some form of lever to quell, if not completely discontinue constitutional rights in this nation? Do you believe this is a setup? Again, 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. Or do you believe we have a genuine problem? It doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to be able to put these pieces together in a pattern that is arguably government abuse of law enforcement and law in general. Now, this is something that also occurred, and it's well known. This also occurred during the Obama administration, where all of these executive branch agencies were politicized to forward a leftist agenda. And again, this is not partisan. This is not conspiracy theory. This is simply news. The problem with all that is, and I'll just bring this up, the problem with this analysis is, just as I vehemently criticized various government investigations involving presidents and the January 6th incursion, or the January 6th riots, when I pointed that stuff out, I realized that they were essentially doing an a la carte menu on whatever convenient facts they could dig up. I have just done that very same thing. You know, I sat there and said, now, wait a minute. Okay, so we got a pattern of law enforcement, or lack thereof, being used as political levers. Then I point out that a U-Haul truck containing apparently one Nazi flag, which of course was carefully laid out on the sidewalk for the photo op. You know, that happened next. That happened just last night. And this, according to NBC News, occurred shortly after the loss of 60,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate. Now, if indeed the hijacking of 60,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate actually occurred, which I doubt sincerely, then how in heaven's name would these white supremacists be able to pull that off? 60,000 pounds? Remember, the rail car was empty. How many trucks do you have to carry off 60,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate? What kind of equipment does it take to load that stuff into the trucks? Can all this happen in a vacuum? Can all this happen in a super secret white supremacist terror plot? Probably not. Probably not. Chances are pretty likely, since every rail car in the United States of America is tracked individually. Every single one. There is an itinerary for that rail car as it's accounted for, as it not just from origination point to destination, but all along the way to forestall this very scenario of someone somehow managing to stop a train, steal an entire rail car or its contents, restart the train without anybody knowing anything about it. Just as all these rail cars are carefully tracked throughout their entire lives, their entire useful life. All these trains are monitored as well. They would know if they stopped for no apparent reason. Now, trains do stop from time to time as traffic is directed through one train headed one direction, one train headed the other direction. That could happen at a railroad siding. So the logical trail leads to someone stealing 60,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate at a railroad siding at some point in that train's traverse across the nation from Cheyenne, Wyoming to LA? Really? It strains the limits of credulity to me. I could be wrong. Yvonne points out, hey, wait a minute. It could have spilled out of the rail car as it was traveling. They would be able to find evidence of it on the tracks. Well, unless, of course, some white supremacist crew was there with whisk brooms and a dustpan, carefully dusting it off the gravel on both sides of the tracks. Let's see. Conservatives will continue to be labeled as white supremacist gun nuts for political gain. Yeah, it will be. Randy says, I don't get the Nazi flag part. Well, neither do I. That's the part I don't understand. And what's going to happen to this 19-year-old from Missouri? I mean, is he going to be branded as a horrifying domestic terrorist? Is he going to be thrown in a federal lockup? Or is all that going to be portrayed to us on a willing media to report the story? And then after he is dragged out in shame, perp walked to the prison, checked in, all the indignities that go with all of that, will he then find himself in the witness protection program with a brand new life, a brand new name? That's assuming, of course, that the name that he's currently under isn't a concoction as well. Now, once again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but the people that are in our government make stunningly errant decisions. And those decisions often result in people losing their lives. It is inescapable that people would connect these dots. Now, of course, when somebody connects these dots, then somebody will say, well, my God, that's misinformation. We have to censor that man. No. My sources are USA Today, Forbes magazine, the FISA court, and all manner of other places. It's real news. But this is how word fails to get out to the people of the United States. And this is how whatever sinister scenario, or at least the speaking of it, gets started and perpetuated. Well, John David, aren't you a part of the problem then? Well, possibly. Something tells me I'm not the only one that thought this. And by the way, if I am the only one that thought this, please, by all means, tell me, John David, you have black helicopters flying around in your underwear right now. That's fine. If you say that, I'll report it. I absolutely will. This show isn't about John David's ego. This show is about the news and the inescapable logic that goes with it. I'm not saying that the logical conclusion is correct. I'm just saying it's out there. And I am asking, as a check and balance on whatever ravings I may be throwing at you right this very moment, I'm asking whether or not you think there's any veracity in this. Do you think that I'm just nuts, or do you think this is possible? A17379-2172. A17379-2172. I just got a text from Kyle Clark. Kyle said, "Hello, JD, looking good." Now, normally you'd say, well, that's nice. But you have to understand something, that Kyle Clark used to work at Disneyland in LA, or was it Disney World? Anyway, he was one of the kids of the kingdom. He played Prince Charming. The man is devilishly handsome. I mean, he's really good looking. Don't go there. Anyway, all I can say is that was very nice coming from an incredibly handsome dude. Randy says you cannot rule out conspiracy. You can't. You simply can't do it. So what do we do? How do we rationalize this in our mind? What is the thought process that goes with the information that we have before us? The idea of legerdemain being practiced by government officials in the United States is well known. And this legerdemain has led to, again, things that strain even the most basic credulity. So what do we do with this? Do we just sit there and go, interesting, blow it off, and then talk about cake? I don't know. I do know that I'm putting it out there because I think you need to know about it. You know, I grew up in the 70s, after the 60s, that led to the eradication of virtually all manners of true racism in the United States. The 80s was a decade. Yeah. Anyway, I'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. But as we continue looking through all this, what are we supposed to think about it? How are we supposed to react to it? Like I said, in the 80s, everybody, in the 70s, in the 60s, there was racial unrest. Racism is a crime against humanity. 70s, we pretty much, had a great time. We buried that. In the 80s, everybody was making so much money, we really didn't have a chance to hate anybody. In the 90s, we enjoyed a very peaceful, wonderful decade, except for a couple of wars that were over very quickly because the United States military actually ran them. That also, by the way, did lead to a war that lasted 2 decades. But the country really wasn't focused on racism until the election of President Obama. And somebody said something, well, this closes the book on racism in the United States. The people of the United States elected an African-American president. And for about 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, there was this feeling of real well-being in the nation until the people that suffered racism in all those decades, suddenly started realizing, wait a minute, our exploitation of that, our exploitation of that racism could come to an end. And the morphing of true racism was then created as a way of exploiting racism. And we've been there ever since. Once again, this being a concerted political course of action by people with an agenda for the United States of America that I don't believe that most Americans believe. And while this connection may be tenuous, all I can tell you is that this government is continuing to try to influence, massage, create what is an agenda-serving series of news articles. What do you think about it? Tell me next. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. John David Wells, thanking you very much for being a part of it. While we're on the subject of governmental legerdemain, political legerdemain, the Fox News folks are reporting that an Arizona judge has now dismissed Republican gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake's only remaining legal claim in her lawsuit challenging her loss to Democrat Governor Katie Hobbs in the 2020 election. Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Peter A. Thompson said Lake did not provide evidence that the signature review process for mail-in ballots in Maricopa County was tainted by misconduct. Lake was a President Donald Trump-backed former TV journalist. She lost the election to Hobbs by roughly 17,000 votes. She then sued, claiming ballot printers in the county were inaccurate. Signatures on mail-in ballots were not properly reviewed as required by state law. She has earned a significant following with Trump supporters, is openly considering a bid for the United States Senate seat, currently held by Kirsten Sinema, a former Democrat, now independent. Lake has also been rumored to be under consideration by former President Trump as a potential running mate for the 2024 presidential election. That would be a strong ticket to consider, by the way. In February, the Arizona Court of Appeals denied Lake's request to throw out ballots and overturn the results of the 2022 election. The Arizona Supreme Court later declined to hear nearly all of Lake's appeal, saying there was no evidence to support her claim that more than 35,000 ballots were added to vote totals. However, the state Supreme Court revived a claim that questioned the signature verification process for early ballots in Maricopa County, which is home to more than 60% of the state voters. County officials defended the signature verification efforts, said they had nothing to hide. At a 3-day trial, Lake's attorneys called witnesses who said the signature verification at lower levels was done hastily and not thoroughly. The higher level reviewers neglected to address inconsistencies. Lake's legal team argued that approximately 70,000 ballot signatures were reviewed for less than 1 second, which they contended was so deficient for signature comparison, it amounted to no verification at all. However, Judge Thompson rejected that argument, writing that to side with Lake, the court would have to rewrite Arizona election law to, quote, insert a minimum time for signature verification and specify variables to be considered in the process, unquote. Not unreasonable. The judge continued, the court finds that looking at signatures that, by and large, have consistent characteristics will require only a cursory examination and thus take very little time. Certainly if they are genuine. He went on to say, the question after the comparison is whether the signatures are consistent to the satisfaction of the recorder or his designee. This, not the satisfaction of the court, the satisfaction of a challenger, or the satisfaction of any other reviewing authority, is the determinative quality for whether signature verification occurred. It would be a violation of the constitutional separation of powers for this court after the recorder has made a comparison to insert itself into the process and reweigh whether a signature is consistent or inconsistent, unquote. So, what we have here is we have what may or may not be the closing chapter in questions regarding the Arizona election. And once again, it's kind of a head scratcher. It's kind of a head scratcher. You know, just exactly what happened. And once again, any kind of investigation is quickly dispatched, which is also interesting. Does it point to some huge plot? Well, maybe. But what I've always found fascinating is that people will say, well, there's not enough voter fraud to actually change an election. Well, according to some sources, 41,000 votes swayed the United States presidential election. 17,000 votes, Kari Lake contends, swayed the Arizona election. So just exactly how little ballot fraud is either permissible or understandable. How much voter fraud does it take? Once again, just asking questions here, not casting aspersions, just asking questions. What are your answers? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Well, to say that these are interesting times might be the greatest understatement of these times. And in the classical Chinese sense, the idea of living in interesting times is a very serious curse. And you can see why, can't you? All right, so there we go. All this very interesting fact finding. If, of course, they're facts. I'm doing my best. These are purported as facts. I report them. But I'm not operating in a vacuum. And it's amazing how many Americans do. This is the Wells Report. Hour number 2 is coming up. Fascinating, isn't it? Isn't this just incredible? All right. Well, I got to get back to work. See you in a minute. Thanks for listening to the Wells Report, more of which continues in 6 minutes. You found the Wells Report, more of which continues in 5 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings, my name is John David Wells. We report the news honestly and fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We make commentary. That is not news. That is opinion, yours and mine. And so we debate. I'm looking at the wrong camera. And in that, what we do is we have a couple of different ways for you to share your points of view. One is our telephone number, 817-379-2172. And as the chief counselor of Camp Wells Report, there are two things I must say. First, I'm displeased at the lack of interaction on our telephone. Most people just, in the text world, just say, hey, we're texting. Yeah, okay, that's good. And I read those, but it's not nearly as good as your voice. I would appreciate it if you would please use the studio line, which is right there. Well, actually, let me see if I can. Yeah, right there. Okay. No, everything's backwards on television. 817-379-2172. See, right there. And call me on the telephone. The other thing is as the chief counselor of Camp The Wells Report, you must keep in mind our camp motto, which is clean mind, clean body. Take your pick. So the other day, the NAACP Board of Directors issued a travel advisory for Black Americans traveling to Florida. The riffing on that travel advisory for Black Americans reached the point of absurdity rather quickly when someone opined on one of the leftist news sources that, you know, you were taking a chance on traveling to a terrorist state. Well, it was so ridiculous and so silly and so stupid that the NAACP Board of Directors chairman said, excuse me? The reason he said that is because he lives in Tampa, Florida. Appearing on MSNBC's The Readout, the chairman, Leon Russell, said that the backlash over the NAACP warning black people against traveling to Florida following Governor Ron DeSantis's aggressive attempts to erase black history was, shall we say, somewhat suspect. Quote, Florida is openly hostile toward African Americans, people of color, and LGBTQ plus individuals. This according to the NAACP Board of Directors' formal travel notice. Quote, before traveling to Florida, please understand the state of Florida devalues and marginalizes the contributions of and the challenges faced by African Americans and other communities of color. Unquote. Florida Republican Party Chairman Christian Ziegler pointed out that Russell's Twitter account shows that he currently lives in the Tampa Bay area. Ziegler commented on the apparent hypocrisy and offered to pay for Russell to leave the state. I'm sorry, that tickles me. Quote, the chairman of the NAACP lives in Tampa, Florida. True leadership is being willing to do what you ask others to do. Time to step up and move. If you think our state is so bad, the Florida GOP will help with moving costs. Russell pushed back on the readout, saying that Ziegler was full of BS. First of all, he's full of BS. Secondly, you need to understand it's not about money, it's about people. It's about humanity. Thirdly, quite frankly, we haven't told anybody to leave. The NAACP is encouraging folks to stay here and fight. If there was ever a reason to stand your ground, it's black people, LGBT community, and the immigrant community. Women need to stand their ground in Florida and fight. And understand the fight is a political fight. Yeah. He continued, it's time to look at policymakers, what they're doing, to remember what they're doing, and the city council, school board, county commission level, where they're running for the highest office in the land, whether they're doing all of the smaller offices or the biggest ones. It's time to understand their record, what their record is, and how they're operated. Russell previously gave a statement attacking DeSantis with the tribal advisory warning. Once again, hate-inspired state leaders have chosen to put politics over people. Governor Ron DeSantis and the state of Florida has engaged in a blatant war against the principles of diversity and inclusion, rejected our shared identities to appeal to a dangerous extremist minority. Really? He continued, we will not allow our rights and history to be held hostage for political grandstanding. The NAACP proudly fights against the malicious attacks in Florida against black Americans. I encourage my fellow Floridians to join this fight to protect ourselves and our democracy. In a statement to Fox News, DeSantis press secretary Jeremy Redfern criticized the advisory by saying, as Governor DeSantis announced this week, Florida is seeing record-breaking tourism. This is nothing more than a political stunt. The NAACP floated the possibility of putting out a travel advisory in March. At the time, DeSantis referred to it as a joke and a stunt. He said, this is a stunt to try to do that. It's a pure stunt. And fine, if you want to waste your time on a stunt, that's fine. But I'm not wasting my time on your stunts. I'm making sure that we get things done here. Well, this may have been a bridge too far for the NAACP. The NAACP leader is saying that, my goodness gracious, this is about humanity. Is it? Is Florida an inhuman state? Is that what you see? Do you believe Florida is an inhuman state? Based on Ron DeSantis trying to, say, for example, react to his voters who made it abundantly clear in the last election that they approved of everything he was doing. A record-breaking win. So who is this extremist minority that the NAACP is talking about? Is it indeed themselves? Did I say record-breaking? Or, yeah, this minority, this small minority of extremists. Who are they talking about? It seems like they're talking about themselves because AOC is going down to Florida. Black Americans live in Florida in great numbers. They love it there. I've lived in Florida. never saw any of this, simply enjoyed my time in a beautiful state with a near perfect climate. And so where do we go from here? Again, this is kind of crazy. And let's talk a little bit about the realities. Okay, as I see them, this is just my opinion. Nobody cares who people cuddle up with at night. What consenting adults do in the privacy of their house is none of our business. Please stop making it our business. Just enjoy your life, please, by all means. That's the way most people feel. Nobody really cares about race in this nation except for the people that exploit it for political purposes. Again, in my opinion. And someone will say, well, that's easy because you have all that white privilege. Yeah, it's privilege, all right. Sure it is. I'm being sarcastic in case you can't pick that up. And so once again, the exploitation of racism for political effect has supplanted, has replaced genuine racism, which is a blight and a stain on this nation. Nobody cares about packaging. Nobody cares. We're living our lives. We're having a wonderful time. And elections do have consequences. I don't understand why people keep saying things like, our history is being quashed. What history? Are you talking about the ravings of, say, for example, a New York Times quote-unquote journalist to say that actually slavery began in the United States of America in 1619? The 1619 Project. There was no United States of America in 1619, and that simple basic fact seems to be ignored. Isaac Tate, who is a history teacher, says, why attempt to cover up a real American history? Tell the complete truth about America. Well, okay, but where do the facts stop and the exploitation of facts begin regarding history? Because we know that exploitation of facts in history with careful cherry picking and just outright incorrect assertions can rule the day in many school districts in these United States. Where do we draw that line? Slavery existed in 1776 as well, right? And it took less than a century for a Republican president to eradicate slavery in our nation. Bigotry was a different thing, but slavery was past tense in 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation. Period. And while it was indeed a stain on the United States of America, beginning in 1776, ending for all intents and purposes in 1863, it was significant, and it affected countless lives in horrifying ways. And just like every other totalitarian rule, it takes a long time to fix it. But that process has been ongoing for more than a century and a half. And once again, it's not about slavery. It's about the exploitation of it for political effect. And to be perfectly honest with you, it's getting tiresome. The default setting to accuse people of slavery excuse me, I'm sorry, I was distracted by somebody else saying something else. It was Isaac, and I'll get to it in a minute. The simple case of the matter is that slavery has been gone in the United States for over a century and a half. What are we doing here? What are we doing? Nobody in the United States of America suffered slavery. No one in the United I mean, when I say that, I'm saying currently in the United States. For the last half century, in that time period, no one has suffered slavery. Nobody owned slaves. It's over a century and a half. When is the war over? Well, there are reasonable statements. The reasonable statements that, yeah, this is something we need to keep in mind. We teach the Civil War, or at least we used to. It's been a long time since I've been in a high school history class. What are they teaching now? If they're teaching this, well, the real history is wrong, that looks a lot like revisionism to me. And what is an excellent tool to, say, for example, I don't know, remake a country? Well, by changing the history. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. A Maryland mother whose daughter was raped and killed by an alleged MS-13 gang member is set to testify before Congress on immigration after she says the White House let her daughter down, leading to her tragic death. Tammy Nobles lost her autistic 20-year-old daughter, Kayla Hamilton, after she was reportedly strangled by an illegal immigrant last year. She shared a heart-rending message for the Biden White House on border security and illegal immigration during an episode of Fox and Friends. If there was a more secure border and individuals coming here were properly vetted, my daughter would still be alive today. They let her down. Officials said U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement confirmed the suspect, 17-year-old El Salvador native, was listed as a member of Mara Salvatrucha, known as MS-13. Authorities were able to nab the suspect in January after comparing his DNA to evidence from the crime scene. He was charged with first-degree murder as well as rape and robbery. He's currently being held without bail. Noble said she wants immigrants to be properly vetted before they're allowed to be in the United States. I want them properly vetted, she says. They need to be able to check their background, not for crimes in this country, but crimes in their country and where they came from. I spent a great deal of time on the border of these United States in the state of Texas. It is not difficult to identify an MS-13 member. It's not difficult. They proudly wear MS-13 tattoos virtually all over their body. And those people that don't are not members of MS-13. It's just something they do. It's not difficult. It is something that needs to be more taken care of than what we currently see by the government of the United States, charged by the Constitution to provide secure borders. And secure borders are secure borders. They're not just declared as such by some government bureaucrat. They actually are secure. Now, do you believe that these borders are secure? You tell me. 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Or you can join us on the chat room. The stories of people deported returning to the United States and committing mayhem are rife. They're only ignored by the mainstream media. And for what purpose? Again, a question I'm asking you. What do you believe the answer is? Again, 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. This mother of her autistic child says the government let her child down. Do you agree or disagree? And why? 817-379-2172. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for being a part of our broadcast. We are giving you the news for this 23rd day of May, year of our Lord, 2023. Why are we facing this? And what I keep thinking about is I remember the heart-squeezing political stylings of both sides in the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and even before that. I remember the 2012 election, and it was something that I noticed then, and I notice it now, that the Obama administration panicked right before the 2016 election because they thought they were going to lose. They didn't, but they sure thought it. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a couple of moments. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. We report the news honestly and fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. We make commentary, which is not news. It is simple opinion, and yours and mine come together in debate. It is the Wells Report. So, what is a republic? A republic is a form of government where the people choose representatives for legislative bodies in most cases, chief executives, and in some cases, judiciary branch officials. That is a republic. They are representatives of the people to do the business of the people. These elections occur every couple of years or so. And those elections are intended to reinforce the will of the people on the government, not the other way around. The greatest minds, the greatest political minds of the 18th century created a country that also included in this republic checks and balances between three branches of government: executive, judiciary, and legislative. And those checks and balances are a reasonable and, in most cases, very, very good, shall we say, mechanisms to correct variances of national or state or local political leanings. One of the great things about this system is that it is self-correcting. Unless, for example, the self-correction process is somehow corrupted or manipulated. And that can be done through information, it can be done through mechanism, it can be done a lot of different ways. But for the most part, this is an enduring system that, as I said, is indeed self-correcting. Now, there are times when these particular branches come into contact and even conflict. There is a way to do that. And there is even a way to set aside these checks and balances for the sake of a political imperative. We may have a case of that in North Carolina. Governor Roy Cooper is a Democrat. He is the chief executive in that state in over a legislative branch, or alongside a legislative branch that is, by and large, indeed a supermajority of Republicans. And he has decided to use a way to quell or even set aside constitutional guarantees for the sake of politics. That is a state of emergency. A state of emergency. We found the use of that most recently in the COVID-19 response by the government of the United States and state governments and county governments and city governments, that people are still both reacting to negatively. I don't really know a lot of people that said, by golly, everything that those government agencies did was right on the button. I can't find a lot of people that believe that. Fox News reports that Democrat Governor Roy Cooper declared a state of emergency yesterday in an attempt to stop a school choice bill from passing the state legislature. Cooper released a video announcement where he declared a state of emergency, arguing that the state of public education is no less important than other emergencies. It is time to declare a state of emergency for public education in North Carolina. There is no executive order like with a hurricane or the pandemic, but it is no less important. Excuse me, Governor, are you actually saying that a change in the political climate regarding public schools in your state is as dangerous as a man-made or natural disaster? If that's the case, then what does that tell us about your leadership regarding public schools? And by the way, what is the exact nature? What is the exact nature of this so-called emergency? Is it an emergency based on societal changing natural or man-made disaster? Or is it a political emergency among those of the left who see a tool that they have used successfully throughout the decades to change the nation politically for the sake of their agenda? Now, that may seem like an emergency to you, but I assure you, in comparison to a lot of the things that we're dealing with, a lot of the actual honest to goodness problems, that is not real. That's just not real. But because of the use of COVID-19 as a national, state, county, local emergency to suspend constitutional guarantees and indeed the balance of powers in governments of the United States, we now have a governor using this particular state of emergency ploy to forestall the political reality of his state. Now, that's not my opinion. The fact that there are supermajorities in both houses of the North Carolina Assembly speak for itself. It's not an emergency. It might be a political disaster looming for a particular part of the American body politic. But it's not an emergency. But then again, he's got that right. And the self-correcting mechanism, if enough people believe that he was wrong in this assertion, well, there will be a correction. Indeed, what will happen is that the voters of North Carolina will remove him from office. We'll see. Cooper released that video announcement. He declared a state of emergency for public education. He continued, "It's clear the Republican legislature is aiming to choke the life out of public education. I'm declaring this state of emergency because you need to know what's happening if you care about public schools in North Carolina. It's time to take immediate action and tell them to stop the damage that will set our schools back for a generation." Cooper's announcement drew intense backlash on Twitter as an overreach of government power. The Blaze columnist Aaron McIntyre wrote, quote, "Executive governing in the permanent state of exception to save our democracy," unquote. Brilliant quote. That is just brilliant. Neutering the abuse of emergency power by the executive branch should be priority number one for every state, conservative account Polymath tweeted. School choice advocate Corey DeAngelis wrote, "They're losing control over the minds of other people's children. Good. Cry harder at Roy Cooper NC." That's his Twitter handle. "What a hypocrite. Public schools aren't good enough for his kids, but they are for yours." Ooh. Purple Strategies partner Rory Cooper commented, "If I were the governor of NC, I would have declared a state of emergency when the state was at the bottom third of states reopening schools and depriving children of education they needed. Not once parents got involved and demanded something better for their kids." A state of emergency over a bill passed by the legislature, very serious, said Americans for Prosperity Vice President Casey Maddox. State of emergency over a bill passed in the legislature. My goodness, very serious. In April, Republican lawmakers in North Carolina announced efforts to move forward with education reform bills that promote school choice. One measure includes a bill that would provide equal funding to charter school students along those who attend public school. Critics, such as Governor Cooper, claim the bill mostly serves to cut funding from public schools. Put together, these ideas spell disaster that requires emergency action. The North Carolina I know was built on support for public schools, and we can't let the legislature tear them down. I went to public schools in North Carolina, and the public schools in North Carolina then, vis-a-vis the public schools in North Carolina now, are completely different. To try to evoke the long-standing support for public schools ignores the fact that public schools are completely different than what they used to be. They're based on politics, not based on knowledge. They're based on ideology, not based on honest rigor of study. You know it. I know it. The people of North Carolina know it. They sent representatives to the legislature to act on these issues and others. The legislature has spoken. the governor has decided that it is better for him to stop the will of the people as demonstrated both by the election of these people and the work they did in the legislature. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. This is a check and balance that was put in place for a reason. Now, that check and balance is being warped by virtue of this declaration of some sort of emergency. Is it an emergency for the left? Sure. Absolutely it is. If indeed this movement across the country catches fire and actually moves forward, what will happen in the United States is that funding will follow the child and not necessarily an area code or a county boundary or some kind of other contrived area that your kids happen to live in. In other words, the funding follows the child, regardless of where it goes. Now, this idea that this is some horrifying attack on public schools belies the political nature of public schools. This is a governor, a politician, declaring an emergency, which is clearly political, over something that the voters of North Carolina have openly rejected. And so we now see the reality. And so this governor has decided to do this. The measures by state Republicans followed an announcement by State Representative Tricia Cotham that said she would be defecting from the Democrat Party to join the GOP. This is something that also points out a schism, a divide in the Democrat Party. There are real Democrats out there. Who believe in the United States of America, the Constitution, free agency, liberty, freedom, and all of these things. They just have a different idea of what the role of government is, and would that the governor of the state of North Carolina would be as, shall we say, an astute politician as Tricia Cotham is, or Cotham. He would say the people have spoken instead of standing up there demagoguing the issue and declaring a state of emergency. On issues like school choice, like charters, we must evolve. One-size-fits-all education is wrong for children. Democrats don't really want to talk about children. They had talking points from adults and adult organizations. Cooper has been criticized for opposing private school vouchers while sending his daughter to a private school in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's also attempted to end the state's Opportunity Scholarship Program, which provides vouchers to lower and middle income students. Who does that harm? It harms everyone. And this is something that you have to understand, at least from my point of view. I've said it over and over and over because it's true. Competition is the crucible of excellence. The very best thing that could happen to public schools in the United States is competition. The very best possibility of outcome for education in the United States is for parents to choose what's best for their children, whether it's public school or not. And indeed, if this does happen, public schools will be forced to come up with a more, shall we say, competitive product. I don't understand, with all the public money going into public schools, why public schools aren't clearly the best schools in the United States. Why is that? I'll tell you why when I return. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for being a part of the broadcast. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. So we were talking about public schools. I can't understand, with all the money in public schools, why they're not the best schools, not just in the nation, but in the world. Public resources. Public resources being used to educate our children. And why is it that we have trouble with education in the United States regarding achievement of our children, regarding their comparison with children around the world? Why is that? Because, as I say on a regular basis, politics has poisoned everything it's ever touched, and it continues to do so. Politics has, for all intents and purposes, at least badly damaged, if not destroyed, public education in the United States. And if I'm wrong, by all means, please explain how I got it wrong, because I don't think I have gotten it wrong. I just don't think so. I think that what we have here is plain and clear. And that being plain and clear, there is a remedy required. Public schools in the United States should be the best schools in the world, and they're not because of politics. And what does politics demand? It doesn't demand education. It demands indoctrination. Just my opinion. So HBO has an interesting program out there that I just heard about today. This from USA Today. It is White House Plumbers. It's a Watergate-focused black comedy series. And in the final seconds of episode number 4, as the episode draws to a close, Dorothy Hunt, played by Lena Headey, who was the Game of Thrones stars, the wife of Watergate burglar, a.k.a. plumber E. Howard Hunt, is about to land at Chicago's Midway Airport on a flight from Washington, D.C. On board with her is $10,000 in cash and a CBS television reporter. Suddenly, the camera lurches, twists 90 degrees, while Hunt freezes in mid-sentence. The screen goes black. That plane, United Airlines 553, really did crash December 8th, 1972, killing 2/3 of its 61 passengers, including Hunt, a congressman, and network reporter Michelle Clark. The tragedy immediately ignited conspiracy theories, including one suggesting the CIA orchestrated the crash. Why? To keep Ms. Hunt from revealing that she knew about hush money payments being funneled from the White House through her family to those involved in the Watergate break-in of the Democrat National Committee headquarters in the Watergate Hotel. We separate fact from fiction surrounding the pivotal history with help of Garrett Graff, the author of the Pulitzer Prize-nominated Watergate: A New History, and guest on the White House Plumbers podcast that accompanies the series. So, what's going on here? The episode shows Hunt chatting up Clark. The CBS reporter implies she was ready to tell more during and after the flight. Was cash part of a payoff? All this is more likely conjecture and ramping up tension in the series. This is, after all, not a documentary. It's not an expose. It's a television program. But it does point out something that we have discussed. The possibility that there are certain measures taken by the government of the United States to satisfy a political imperative. We started our broadcast with it, and we have continued with various stories explaining how that is a part of American life. Most of it is not nearly as dramatic or as dark as the possibility of government murder of people that are about to spill the beans. But then again, you really can't turn away from the fact that there have been a lot of people losing their lives that were both about to spill the beans or in a position to spill the beans. You don't have to go back very far. 4 years will do, if you believe in such things. We, the people of the United States, are being faced with a consistent series of questions. The answers are either not available, insufficient, or they are simply misinformation. Why? Why in these United States, an entire country based on free speech, why is it that it's so hard to get the government of the United States to speak in a truthful fashion? Once again, it is because of politics. And that is, as we have seen in so many ways, for so many reasons, ruinous. Can we please do something about it? Politics has its place. Go ahead and try to have a society without them. But how big a place should that be? I put forward on this broadcast and others that politics plays way too important a part in our lives. Who agrees? This has been the Wells Report. Thanks very much for being a part of our broadcast. Sorry about the bump at the beginning. But like I said, some things just happen. Back with more tomorrow on the Wells Report. All right, so there you go. Listen, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Chat room. Yeah. Once again, talking about things totally unrelated to the broadcast is not what the chat room's for. Don't understand why it continually happens. Don't understand what the need is. I don't know why there is a para talk show going on there that has nothing to do with the one we're talking about. That's not what the chat room's for. So please do, by all means, evaluate what that's for, and please come up with a different solution. Most people talk about what we're talking about, but a lot of people don't. Can we stop that, please? Let's try to focus on what we're talking about. Something that happened years and years and years ago has nothing to do with today's news. This show is about today's news, today's analysis, today's commentary and today's debate, not years and years ago, except to garnish or perhaps clarify a historical perspective or a historic perspective. Can we please stick to that? I sure would appreciate it.